characterized prices in the last beige book, which came out in late February. The 12 regional Fed districts saw modest to moderate economic growth, again since the last beige book. So that's 7 districts versus only 3, a significant improvement on the economic growth front. The labor market, remained tight. Of course, that is no surprise given the fact that this country has a 5% unemployment rate. Notably, the regional Fed banks said companies in their districts had trouble filling both low-skilled jobs in industries such as retail, for example, or construction, and also higher skilled jobs in engineering, accounting, and information technology. Wage growth remains the big question mark, given the fact that we've had hourly earnings increase in hourly earnings of only 2.3% in the past year. And there, the picture is more varied across the country. Wage pressures were strongest in New York, in St. Louis, in Minneapolis, and in San Francisco. Of course, those are the regional Fed districts, especially, and this bears repeating, in the industries where labor is tightest. Wage growth was weakest in Kansas City and St. Louis. And David and Lisa, I would point out, as you both know, the Fed Beige Book is about anecdotal information. It's not data. It's highly anecdotal, which is why the Fed leaves us grasping at words such as modest and moderate. What exactly is modest? What exactly is moderate? In numerical terms, we don't know, and that is the point behind this report. Overall, however, with a few gaps here and there, the anecdotes signal that the domestic economy is gaining strength. It is improving. We see that in prices. We see that in wages. We see that in economic growth. But again, it's only the domestic picture. It doesn't say anything about what's happening outside the country, these external risks that the Fed has highlighted. And that is something that the Fed Beige Book can't answer.
All right, Eric, stay with us if you will. We're going to get a check of the markets now, see how it's reacting. We're going to go to Julie Hyman at the markets desk. Julia.
So we have not seen much reaction as of yet. Perhaps people still reading through the Beige Book to try to get the takeaways. But stocks and bonds pretty much holding steady from where they were before these headlines came out. The NASDAQ hanging on to its leadership on the day. All 3 major averages have been strengthening after we got that economic data out of China. Here in the U.S., economic data was more mixed, but it has not served to really put a dent in the rally that we're seeing today. Let's take a look at the bond market and the 10-year and its reaction, or lack thereof, as the case may be. Now, going into these headlines, we had seen some buying into the Treasury market. The yield on the 10-year moved lower to 1.76%. But as you can see, there hasn't been much reaction just directly in the wake of this report. Let's also take a look at the groups within the S&P 500. Financials continue to take the lead on J.P. Morgan's better than estimated earnings report. Industrials, materials. So big cyclical-led rally today, even as the more defensive groups are lagging. Staples, telecom, and utilities trading lower today. J.P. Morgan shares have really been building on their gains throughout the day, now near the highs of the session, up 4.5% on that stronger report. We've also been watching the commodities today, a bit of a mixed report on the weekly inventories for oil, showing a build in crude oil inventories, but also an uptick in gasoline demand and a drop in production. You can see heating oil, little change right now, and gasoline not really getting a benefit from that gasoline demand number. Crude oil has come way back from earlier declines and is now a little changed.
Yeah, the focus on oil here ahead of that big meeting in Doha. We had the inventories report this morning. What about grains? What are we seeing in other commodities?
Grains are having a big day, and it looks like that.
I keep saying that.
I know.
Yeah. Grains are just having a huge day.
It comes back to China. It looks like that export data showing the biggest gain in about a year. So corn, wheat, soybeans up big today, and if you look at an index of them together, it's up the most in about 7 months. If you look at the feed through though, to fertilizer makers, we're not seeing it today. Agrium is getting recommended as a short over at Hedgeye, saying that the analysts there saying that there is going to be a continuing farm downswing, that rally in the grains notwithstanding. So Agrium shares down by 1%.
All right, Julie, thank you so much. That's Julie Hyman there at the markets desk. And let's get more on the Fed Beige Book data with Bloomberg's Eric Schatzker joining us from D.C. I say data, as you pointed out, Eric, a lot of anecdote here. Julie was just talking about energy, about oil prices, and I wonder if we've seen that borne out here in the latest Beige Book.
Yes, as you would expect, David and Lisa and Julie, of course, the Dallas Fed has the most to say about energy because it is in the Dallas area that we see most of American energy production, at least that which is outside Alaska. Low prices in general are weighing on output, energy output and mining output. We hear that from the Dallas Fed, but we hear it more broadly from the 12 Fed regional banks. There are, however, if we look past energy, a number of bright spots. Manufacturing activity is up in most districts. There was some expectation that we would see that, but it is borne out in this report. And manufacturing, the Fed has noted in previous beige books, has been held back by the strength of the dollar. Retailers, would you believe it, are generally optimistic about the outlook for 2016. And it talked about the all-important wage growth. Wages were up in all 12 districts, save for Atlanta, and most of the Fed's 12 districts reported that wage growth, several, not most, but several of the Fed's 12 districts reported that wage growth is picking up. And that bodes very well for those who would like to see some inflation, count Janet Yellen among them.
So, Eric, I'm looking at this, I'm hearing what you're saying. This seems overwhelmingly positive. Is there any hint in here of why the Fed did not or sort of ratcheted back their expectations for how much they would raise rates this year, or show any hesitation whatsoever to going ahead with their plan? I mean, was there any negative point here?
I would say, I will answer your question in two ways, Lisa. First, I would say in general, no, but that isn't entirely inconsistent with the picture that the Fed has painted of the domestic economy right now. What the Fed clearly is most concerned about is how external risks will feed into the performance of the U.S. economy. And as we saw with the last summary of economic projections, the Fed does anticipate that that will put downward pressure on the pace of economic growth between now and the end of the year. The only, call it negative, that I can find in this report is the anecdotal evidence suggesting that low oil prices are still keeping input costs down and generally creating some disinflationary pressure. But this beige book covers the period of late February through to the end of March. And as we know, of course, crude prices have been on a tear thus far in April. And so some of those disinflationary pressures may already be dissipating.
Eric, you mentioned the optimism that retailers have in most of those Fed districts. I wonder what you've ascertained here about consumer sentiment and consumer spending. When you look at the whole U.S. economic picture, those have been points that have been a bit weak here in the last month or two.
The Fed regional banks, again, just to re-emphasize, the Fed is drawing anecdotal information from its 12 regional banks who speak to CEOs in their districts over the course of this period. And consumer spending rose modestly in most districts, and so that, again, is a bit of a qualitative change, and I emphasize that this is all qualitative information and not based directly on quantitative data. Business spending and real estate activity, also expanded over this period of late February to the end of March relative to the previous beige book. And just to further highlight that economic conditions domestically do seem fairly robust, credit conditions didn't just improve, but banks, the commercial banks in these 12 regional Fed districts, largely reported that lending was becoming more competitive. The banks are competing with each other, and that is putting pressure on net interest margins. And so the banks are very eager to extend credit, which suggests that perhaps the underlying picture for corporate America is improving, because when you lend money, all you really want back more than anything else is your principal.
All right. Well, that's an incredibly positive report. Thank you, Eric Schatzker. Now
it does seem that way, doesn't it?
It does. It's really pretty impressive. Let's get to Bloomberg First Word News this afternoon. Mark Crumpton has more from our news desk. Mark?
Lisa, thank you. Authorities in Spain have arrested a Frenchman they believe supplied weapons to one of the suspects in the deadly January 2015 terror attacks in Paris. 27-year-old Antoine Deneve was apprehended in a southern coastal town in Spain. 2 other men were also taken into custody. 4 people were killed inside a kosher supermarket in that 2015 attack. In all, 20 people, including a policewoman and the gunman, were killed. The Environmental Protection Agency is working to strengthen a federal rule limiting lead and copper in drinking water. But the acting chief of the EPA's water office says proposed changes won't be released until next year, with a final ruling expected months after that. A bipartisan bill to provide federal funds to help Flint, Michigan is stalled in the Senate. Utah Republican Mike Lee says the funds will add to the deficit. Donald Trump says the Republican presidential nomination is being stolen from him. The New York Times says Trump is trying to cast a shadow of illegitimacy over the contest to select delegates to the Republican National Convention in July. Trump calls the system absolutely rigged and phony. This after Texas Senator Ted Cruz beat him in delegate contests in Colorado, North Dakota, and Iowa. Federal prosecutors revealed today an individual accusing former House Speaker Dennis Hastert of sexual abuse will speak at Hastert's sentencing in his hush money case. The sister of another alleged victim is also expected to testify. Hastert has only pleaded guilty to breaking banking laws, but in a pre-sentencing memo, prosecutors accused Hastert of abusing 5 boys when he was a high school wrestling coach in Illinois. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by our 2,400 journalists in more than 150 news bureaus around the world. I'm Mark Crumpton. David, back to you.
Thanks so much, Mark. Coming up in the next 20 minutes of Bloomberg Markets, Goldman Sachs has been paying more attention to liquid alternative investments, and now some of these so-called liquid alts are outperforming their hedge fund peers. Goldman's Larry Restieri joins us next to explain.
Then, at the bottom of the hour, we'll look at the commodities close. What impact will the upcoming OPEC meeting have on crude prices?
As we head to a break, a look at the yields today on the U.S. 2-year and 10-year following the release of the Fed's Beige Book just moments ago.
Disruption is just another word for opportunity, if you know where to look. Homes transforming into hotels. Streaming video services cutting the cable. India's smartphones turning into shopping carts. Seeing what others have seen, but uncovering what others have not. Research that helps you harness disruption. That's the power of global connections. Bank of America Merrill Lynch, voted top global research firm 5 years running.
This is Bloomberg Markets. I'm David Gura, along with Lisa Bromowitz. It's time for the Bloomberg Business Flash. A look at some of the biggest business stories in the news right now. Charter Communications' proposed merger with Time Warner Cable has cleared an important hurdle. A judge has recommended that California regulators approve the deal. A vote by the California Public Utilities Commission could take place next month. The merger still needs approval from the FCC and antitrust officials at the Justice Department.
Ex-Massey Energy CEO Don Blankenship is asking an appeals court if he can remain free while appealing his case. Blankenship was sentenced to the maximum prison time of 1 year and fined $250,000. He was convicted of conspiring to willfully violate mine safety standards. A West Virginia coal mine exploded in 2010, killing 29 men.
Tens of thousands of Verizon landline and cable workers on the East Coast have walked off the job. They've been working without a contract since August. Today's strike involves about 39,000 employees in 9 eastern states and Washington, D.C. Their unions say they're striking because Verizon wants to freeze pensions, make layoffs easier, and rely more on contract workers. And that is your Business Flash update. And some breaking news here. The Wall Street Journal reporting that the U.S. is seeking to ban Theranos' founder Elizabeth Holmes from blood testing. Again, the Wall Street Journal has been reporting quite extensively on Theranos. The headline here from the Journal, Feds propose barring Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes from the blood testing industry for 2 years. The newspaper saying that she's not been able to convince regulators that she's been able to change practices and policies at the company. Liquid alternative investments, or LAI, are starting to outperform some of their hedge fund counterparts. Interest in alternative investment strategies has grown exponentially over the past 2 years. They're cheaper than hedge funds and offer the same kind of exposure.
But are they a good investment for the long-term investor? Joining us now is Larry Restieri, Goldman Sachs Head of Alternative Sales. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's put this into perspective. Liquid alt funds have grown from about $70 billion in 2009 to well over $400 billion. This is a huge universe, many different funds. How does an average investor sift through all of these and figure out the good from the bad? Because there are both.
Well, look, I think that's actually been the challenge for a lot of investors. So liquid alternative investments are new to a lot of retail investors. So if you think about it, alternatives have been around for decades, and hedge fund and institutional investors, high net worth investors have had exposure to them and have been investing in them. It's really over the last, I'd say, 10 years or so that we've seen the growth of liquid alternatives. So alternative mutual funds, which look to give investors alternative investment like exposures, but in the form of a mutual fund. So with the benefits of the daily liquidity of a mutual fund. Now, one of the challenges that mutual fund investors have is that they're used to looking at their investments in a certain way. So they're used to just owning stocks and bonds. This is a completely new asset class for them. So what's one of the things we've tried to do at Goldman Sachs is educate investors on how they might be able to look at liquid alternatives. And we think by looking at them through the lens of hedge funds, which, as I said, hedge funds have been around for decades. There are thousands of hedge funds. It's a trillion-dollar industry, so you have a very big industry to look at and thousands of funds, so there's a good data set. If we look at liquid alts a little more like hedge funds, we can see how they perform and maybe get a better assessment of how to put them in a portfolio.
Bearing in mind how nascent this market is, it hasn't been around a long time, what do we know about how investments in this sector do in the long term?
Well, it's still new. So like I said, they've only been around for a few years, so the data set doesn't go back quite as far. But that said, what we've seen, and we've tried to kind of slice and dice the liquid alts universe into more traditional hedge fund classifications and look at them relative to hedge funds. So I think the beauty of looking at them relative to hedge funds is we can go back further. We can look at a longer data set. So we can go back 25 years and see how hedge funds have performed. And if we can show that these liquid alts perform a lot like hedge funds, then hopefully you can make a more educated investment decision. And I think one of the things we found as we've been running our analysis is that liquid alternatives do in fact perform a lot like hedge funds.
One thing that I'm struggling with, you have funds that are mutual funds. They have to have the liquidity to meet daily redemptions. They charge fees that are somewhat higher than the average actively managed mutual funds. They're supposed to deliver alpha that's more than the average mutual fund. So you get everything and then some. Here you go. How does that work? I don't understand.
So within the rules of mutual funds, in its own way, so that when we think about liquid alternatives and adding them into a portfolio, it's about kind of diversifying away from just your stocks and bonds, adding another return driver. So what they have shown an ability to do is just add this other source of return by by being more active, less constrained than a traditional mutual fund.
Talk to us a bit about what the future holds here, again, bearing in mind that this is a pretty young thing. Are we going to see ETFs in this space?
Well, we've already seen some, and I think we will continue to see more. I think where we are now, I think a couple of years ago, we were probably in the first or second inning of the liquid alts evolution. We're probably in maybe the fourth inning now. So where I think we are now is kind of a maturation of the space. You've seen continued growth. So even though last year you saw less growth, there was still growth, whereas a lot of the mutual fund industry saw net outflows. So we continue to see growth. We continue to see better players get in the space. we continue to see advisors and clients be more educated about the space. And I think, frankly, as investors are more educated, as advisors are more educated, they'll see the benefits of owning liquid alternatives over a market cycle.
Fascinating topic. Thank you so much. Larry Ristiri, Goldman Sachs, Head of Alternative Sales.
Thank you.
We appreciate you being here.
Still ahead on Bloomberg Markets. History is on the line as the NBA closes out the regular season tonight. The Golden State Warriors are gunning for a record 73 wins while Kobe Bryant plays his last game ever. How much will tickets cost you in Los Angeles and Oakland? We'll tell you coming up next.
A lot.
That's for sure.
You're watching Bloomberg Markets. I'm Lisa Abramowitz along with David Gura. Two huge historic games in the NBA tonight. Kobe Bryant playing his last game and the Golden State Warriors going for the NBA's all-time regular season wins record.
So how much will it cost you to take in the games in either Oakland or Los Angeles? Joining us now is Bloomberg sports business reporter Eben Novy-Williams. Let me start by saying I'm surprised there are tickets available here. What does that say that here leading up to these games, just a few hours away, you or I could take out a credit card, tell us how much we'd have to spend, but we could get tickets to these
Take out a
games.
mortgage.
Yeah, mortgage.
Essentially, a lot of brokers held out until these last couple days, knowing that there would be for Kobe this kind of last-minute rush for people that want to see his final game, and knowing that for the Warriors, it could come down, this record that they're trying to break could come down to the final game. So that's why there's tickets available. They're expensive. To see Kobe, it's $1,100 on average right now. The Warriors are a little bit less than that, but it's still a high premium ticket.
Okay, I'm going to get killed for this, but I'm interested in the market for these tickets, of course. So what is the market, the secondary market for basketball tickets like, and how regulated is it? I mean, could somebody just basically say, I have a couple tickets, no one else is selling them, I'll put it out there and charge $1,100 and somebody will buy it?
Sure, yeah. So most of the sales happen on secondary markets like StubHub, for example, which are, I mean, they're totally regulated. And a lot of it just depends on how good the game is, obviously, and these happen to be tremendous games. And the issue that you're going to see with these games tonight is there's a lot of inventory out there.
What has demand been like for Lakers games this whole season? I recall reading that a lot of people were traveling far, spending a lot of money on tickets to Lakers games, and Kobe actually wasn't playing a ton this season.
Yeah, so I would say that most of, probably the entire demand for Lakers tickets this year were just a last chance to see Kobe. You know, when he played in other arenas, and it was a media thing as well. It was a big deal that this was Kobe's last time playing against LeBron, playing in San Antonio, et cetera. But the team itself is not very good, which usually keeps prices low.
There you go.
What about Warriors tickets? I mean, I would think that Warriors would be incredibly expensive as well, given the fact.
Absolutely, yeah.
History.
They've been high all year. You see it on the road. They're usually the most expensive ticket in an opposing arena all year. The thing about the Warriors tickets right now, sure, there's a chance to see history tonight. But if you're really a Warriors fan, I think you maybe care a little more about the playoffs. You know, for Kobe, this is it. There's no more basketball for Kobe. For the Warriors, there's another possible 12 or 15 home games. So I think that's kind of playing into the fact that they're a little cheaper right now.
Does any of this money actually go back to the teams?
I mean, not directly, no. A large portion goes to the StubHub will take 22, 23% for sellers' fees. The team has sold out its arena, which is the money that goes to them. And it's this delicate balance for teams about how much you want to keep prices really high because there's demand for it, or how much you want to keep prices lower because you know that there are fans who can't really afford the high-price tickets that you want to give an opportunity to see your games.
And I'm going to bet that if I were at the Staples Center tonight, there would be the opportunity to buy some commemorative gear.
Oh, yeah. There's $30,000 hats out there.
There you go.
Throwing that out there.
All right. Bloomberg's Evan Novi-Williams, thank you very much.
And still ahead in Bloomberg Markets, commodity close, oil bouncing around today. More on those and some headlines of Theranos coming up next on Bloomberg Markets.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York, this is Bloomberg Markets. I'm David Gura.
And I'm Lisa Bromwitz. Let's get a check of the Bloomberg First Word headlines this hour with Mark Crumpton in the newsroom. Mark.
Lisa, David, thank you so much. In our news on this Wednesday afternoon, the head of the Republican National Committee is challenging Donald Trump's claims that the nomination process is rigged. RNC Chairman Reince Priebus says the rules have been in place for a year. He tweeted, "It's the responsibility of the campaigns to understand it. Complaints now? Give us a break," end quote. Democrat Jeff Merkley of Oregon is endorsing Bernie Sanders for president. He's Sanders' first Senate colleague to do so. Merkley gives Sanders high marks for resisting trade treaties that Sanders says have cost American jobs. But Merkley also concedes Sanders has an uphill battle to win the Democratic nomination. Charges of workplace discrimination against LGBT employees jumped 28% last year. That's according to Jenny Yang, chairman of the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. She told Bloomberg, quote, "More and more people are willing to talk about the issues." The increase in bias charges follows the U.S. Supreme Court's landmark decision legalizing same-sex marriage. EEOC data shows monetary awards for the bias cases increased 51% to just over $3 million. The FBI is offering a reward of up to $25,000 for information leading to the recovery of 7 Andy Warhol paintings. The Campbell's Soup collection was part of the artwork stolen from the Springfield Art Museum in Missouri on April 7th. It's valued at approximately $500,000. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by our 2,400 journalists in more than 150 news bureaus around the world. I'm Mark Crumpton.
Production fell to the lowest level since October 2014. At the same time, U.S. inventories rose last week by about 6.5 million barrels. WTI settling in the red for the day at $41.63.
Now, more on the breaking news this hour and a possible major setback for the blood testing company Theranos. The Wall Street Journal reporting that the federal health regulators have proposed banning Theranos founder and CEO Elizabeth Holmes from the blood testing business for at least 2 years.
The report says regulators concluded that the company failed to fix what regulators have called major problems at its laboratories in California. Bloomberg's Drew Armstrong, who's been covering Theranos, joins us now with more. Let's dig a bit into what the Journal's reporting here. Essentially, the crux of this complaint from the federal government, from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, is that Theranos had 45 deficiencies in their testing. And they didn't correct 43 of them.
Yeah, so this company, they've been based in California, which is where the lab that's in question is as well. And what we know right now is that for the last several months, and including into last year, they were getting inspected by federal regulators working for Medicare, essentially, who were coming in, checking their lab equipment, saying, hey, does this stuff work? Are you providing people with accurate test results? That really matters because if you're, let's say, a patient with a heart condition, you go there, you get it checked, and you want to know that your medication's working. You don't need to go to your doctor and get your dose adjusted or something like that. I mean, it's very important for the practice of medicine. And so what they're saying now is, proposing essentially you haven't fixed these problems, is what the Wall Street Journal is reporting, and that they're going to ban them for 2 years. This is a startup. This is not, a company that is necessarily, this is built around one person's vision and their idea for this company. It is Elizabeth Holmes. If she is gone, I have a feeling that so likely is this company. It's not like this is a big established business with a massive chain in place of, potential successors and everything like that. It's still at a very vulnerable point as a healthcare company.
Well, I was actually just going to ask, so is this the death knell for Theranos? And if so, how much money is on the line and who's going to lose it? Yeah,
if it's not the death knell, it would certainly be a pretty mortal blow and leave them in a really terrible position. After all the criticism that Holmes has taken, the company has stuck by her. This is a private company, kind of with her hand-picked board, some very loyal
august board.
Yeah, and look at everything that has happened to this company. It has been problem after problem, negative press, and there have been really no significant changes at the top of this company, which I don't think would be the case necessarily when we've seen other companies that have run into significant trouble on this scale. Valiant, for example, the CEO is gone, and internal investigations and efforts to get this right for shareholders. When you're in a private market, you don't necessarily have that same level or type, at least, of accountability that you have in a public market.
Talk, though, at one point here of a $9 billion valuation for this company.
Yeah, and we haven't seen a new one since that. That's just an older number that we've seen thrown around for a long time. It's what the company is stuck by. We don't know if at some point they're going to have to go out and raise more money because they aren't going to be able to commercialize this product as fast as they would like, and they're going to be burning stuff. Certainly a 2-year ban would probably necessitate some of that. I mean, them going out and getting more resources in order to kind of carry on. But yeah, we don't know where that valuation is. It's a private valuation at this point. I have a feeling that, given that it came out before all of this happened, that you might see something a little bit lower than that if they were to do another round of funding.
Is there any potential appeals process or any way that even if federal regulators did come after Theranos, they could somehow overturn that and keep operating? Yeah,
we don't know exactly what the result of this letter has been. So when CMS sends one of these letters, Medicare sends one of these letters, what they essentially do is they start, it's a very serious letter. They're not messing around here, but they do essentially open up a negotiation saying, all right, you have 10 days to write us back, tell us exactly how you're fixing these problems, how will you resolve these issues, and they want to see a satisfactory answer. Now, Theranos has run into a lot of problems with regulators where they have not provided those sorts of satisfactory answers from what we've seen in a handful of inspection reports. So if this letter was sent back in March, from what we know, if they came back and did not give CMS what they wanted to see, that may be that it may be the case that something even more serious has happened, or that ban could be in place, or it may be that they're still negotiating this. They've got their lawyers talking to the CMS regulators and things like that. A lot of this process does happen behind closed doors until it is made final. And as the most recent thing we know was that Theranos was still operating. We haven't heard an announcement from the company that Elizabeth Holmes is gone. So there's no reason to believe yet that that's the case. Or it could be that this exchange with Medicare is still ongoing and they're trying to work it out.
You mentioned how closely tied Elizabeth Holmes is to this company, which she founded, having left Stanford without graduating. How much should we read into the fact that she's singled out, that the president of this company are singled out by the federal government, that they are facing the ban? It's not the company that's being banned.
Yeah, I think part of it is going to be, when regulators are looking at a case like this, they're not only trying to find problems at the company, but they're also trying to find the people who they believe are responsible for that. And it is rare, I would say, for an individual to be singled out. When we look at FDA inspection reports or Medicare inspection reports or something like that, typically it's aimed right at the company in and of itself. Pure speculation here, but it would suggest that they have had an issue with her, or that they feel that she is entangled enough with the company as its founder and CEO and everything like that, that they want to target, that they're trying to target her directly. But yes, usually when we have these types of government inspections, it is very much a regulator versus company, regulator versus laboratory establishment or something like that. Rarely, or not always at least, does it go after an individual.
Are they very common, these letters?
They are very common in the sense that regulators are always inspecting. Keep in mind, we have a very tight. It's one of the most regulated industries in the world. The biopharmaceutical industry, of which I would consider this a part. So yes, you're typically getting inspected all the time by state and federal regulators. They want to make sure people's lives are on the line. That's why this is taken so seriously. This is a life or death, health and well-being issue for most people. It's not hey, did the arm break off my toy or something like that. So yes, they are extremely tightly regulated. FDA does a ton of inspections. CMS does the same thing for a lot of similar types of plants that provide or laboratories that provide a level of service. A lot of times they will go after areas where they think that there are problems, or there's been attention brought that there are problems. I'm sure that that's what happened here. This company got a ton of attention, and then all of a sudden they're being investigated by and inspected by CMS. That's no coincidence, I don't think.
Well, thank you so much, Drew Armstrong of Bloomberg News. Very helpful.
Coming up in the next 20 minutes of Bloomberg Markets, Hillary Clinton has lost 7 straight contests to Bernie Sanders, yet she maintains an overwhelming lead in the delegate count. Why next week's primary in New York could seal the deal for her no matter how many more contests she loses.
And Facebook shares gave up early gains today as the company holds its F8 developers conference. Is the social network about to face an ad spending slowdown?
As we head to break, a look at the so-called FANG stocks today. We see Amazon, Netflix, and Alphabet all up. Facebook down 2.2 points, 2%. This is Bloomberg Markets. I'm David Gura. It's time for the Bloomberg Business Flash. Look at some of the biggest business stories in the news right now. A federal appeals court has cleared the way for Argentina to settle its debts. The Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in New York City turned away creditors who wanted to keep in place court-ordered protections. Since January, Argentina has reached deals to pay out over $8 billion to creditors, including U.S. hedge funds. The creditors went to court in New York after Argentina defaulted on $100 billion in bonds back in 2001.
Meanwhile, in Miami, Carnival is being sued in federal court. The case involves a policy that prevents Cuban nationals from arriving or departing by the island by sea. 2 Cuban Americans are claiming their civil rights were violated because they were not permitted to buy tickets on a cruise from Miami to Cuba. The potential class action lawsuit asks a judge to force Carnival to allow all people of Cuban origin to sail on cruises to Cuba.
And Facebook is putting a big emphasis on virtual reality as it holds its F8 gathering. Chief Technology Officer Mike Shrepford came out with some interesting statistics during his talk, including word that 1 billion stories are posted on Facebook every day, and that users have logged 2 million hours of video on Gear VR. Stay with us for Bloomberg's Emily Chang conversation with Mike Shrepford, set for 3:45 p.m. Wall Street time. And that is your Business Flash update. Let's turn to politics. Bernie Sanders picking up his first endorsement from a colleague in the Senate. Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley writing a New York Times op-ed that Sanders is boldly and fiercely addressing the biggest challenges facing our country.
But despite a recent string of wins, Sanders still faces a major uphill battle when it comes to the delegate count. Hillary Clinton is leading by a substantial margin, and a big part of her advantage coming from nearly 500 superdelegates. Joining us now is Bloomberg's Washington bureau chief, Megan Murphy. Megan, tell us about these superdelegates. Why are they so critical to Hillary's lead right now?
Well, they're critical in the sense that these are people who are going to get behind Hillary Clinton, independent of what is actually playing out in these states where we've seen Sanders rack up this impressive string of victories. And this is sort of crucial to why he has such a difficult gap to close. One, she has more pledged delegates from that process, indeed, but she has far more than he does in these officials, in these lawmakers, in these governors, in these officials who are going to back her regardless of that process. And the argument that the Sanders campaign is trying to make is, look, you need to reflect the will of the people. We've racked up big wins in states like Minnesota, Alaska, et cetera, and they're going to be in the process now of trying to peel away either those superdelegates who are uncommitted or even those from those states that have already said they will back Hillary Clinton.
There seems to be a narrative emerging here when you look at the Democratic side and the Republican side. You have Bernie Sanders, who I think you could say maybe the team that he'd compiled to work on his campaign hadn't thought through how to collect these delegates in advance. You look at the Republican side, Donald Trump's complaints about what happened in Colorado over the weekend. It seems like there was an omission of some strategy on both sides of the aisle here.
Was there an omission strategy? I'm not so sure. In this sense, the Bernie Sanders campaign, I think if they're frank and upfront, they would say, look, they never expected to be in the situation they were in. They are within, striking distance of actually securing the nomination over a nominee who was the overwhelming prohibitive favorite coming in. So I think what they're always trying to do is make up ground and look ahead. We've got the big New York contest coming up where they're really trying to close that gap with Hillary Clinton. They're looking ahead to California as well. So I think it's more they're in a situation where his candidacy has just proven much stronger and has resonated so much more deeply with the American public, and that feeling that's out there right now. On the Donald Trump side, you can say as many times as you want that the process is rigged, but on the Republican side, the process is the process. And he's going to continue making that complaint again, that party officials are not reflecting the will of the people and how they're assigning the delegates. But yes, he's gotten outfoxed in how these delegates are awarded. Ted Cruz is beating him in states that even have yet to vote. He's beating him in states like Colorado and getting these people and securing the support of these delegates. And that's why on the Republican side, we're edging closer to a contested convention in July in Cleveland.
Right. Sticking with Trump and some of the fractures that are occurring in the Republican Party, there was some very heated words between the RNC chair and Trump of late on Twitter and elsewhere, talking about how Donald Trump's attempt to run or make an independent run, possibly if he doesn't win, could be problematic. Can you walk us through this? And is there any way that these fractures could be healed at all?
Look, let's be very clear. An independent run by Donald Trump would be disastrous to the Republican Party. It would make it almost impossible surely for the Republican candidate to secure a win in the general election over Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders if a miracle occurs there. So this is what the Republican Party faces. As we edge closer and as we move along this very long process now, it is looking at a fundamental schism of the party because people who support Donald Trump have say in various numbers, depending on what polls you're looking at, but as many as half, as much as a third, will not support the Republican nominee if it is not Donald Trump. If he runs as an independent third-party candidate, well, look, he's going to draw a sizable portion of people, maybe 20%, maybe higher. That makes it difficult, I mean, impossible for the established candidate, the candidate who goes through that process, to actually secure a general election win. That is why the party is, as we get closer, really focused on how far do they want to carry this Stop Trump movement. Are they willing to risk a true fracturing of the party, potentially not only for this election, but for elections to come? Or is there going to be pressure to say, look, he is still the person with the best chance of this nomination. We'd rather hold our noses and get behind him than risk a true seismic split of this party.
Megyn, what's your reaction to what the House Speaker said yesterday, Paul Ryan's statement that he in no